Dear friends, we gather this afternoon to remember one who filled our world with his love, his goodness, his spirit, and example. In humility and gratitude, we turn to the wisdom of our tradition for comfort, for guidance, and for understanding. Throughout the centuries, whenever our people felt lost, confused, bereaved, adrift, they would turn to the Psalms, to the book of Psalms. One of the favorites was Psalm 121, Asa'inai el heharim me'ayin yavo ezri. I lift my eyes to the mountains. What is the source of my help? My help comes from God, maker of heaven and of earth. Esa'inai el heharim me'ayin yavo ezri. Esa'inai el heharim me'ayin yavo ezri. Ezri me'im Adonai osei shamayim va'aretz. Ezri me'im Adonai osei shamayim va'aretz. Esa'inai el heharim me'ayin yavo ezri. For those of you for whom the 23rd Psalm is familiar, I invite you to join with me in its recitation. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He guideth me in straight paths for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou hast anointed my head with oil. My cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever. We have already begun to realize that in the rising of the sun and in its going down, we will remember him. In the blowing of the wind and in the chill of winter, we will remember him. In the opening of buds and in the rebirth of spring, in the rustling of leaves and in the beauty of autumn, in the beginning of the year, and when it ends, we will remember him. When we are weary and in need of strength, when we are lost and sick at heart, when we have joys we yearn to share, we will remember him. So long as we live, he too shall live, for he is now a part of us as we remember him. My dear Cindy, Jeff, Janice, Jeffrey, Judy, John, and Julie, dear family, dear friends, we come to this moment suspended in, buffeted by, and even comforted by a kaleidoscopic array of emotions that we can hardly understand, let alone contain. How is it possible that one who was so vital, so full of energy and vitality, who knew hundreds, thousands of people, every single one of whom was a friend, who would drop everything and run if any of us needed him, who loved all sports but was crazy for golf, who had a natural instinct for having fun, who understood math and computers and made both accessible to non-techies, who loved every kind of music and never crossed a dance floor he didn't like, who loved to be entertained by movies, concerts, theater, shows, comedy clubs, TV, or a meal with his loved ones, who always had a Diet Coke in his hand, who loved to laugh and share laughter with others, who was honest, straightforward, loving, and so good. How is it possible that he no longer lives among us? And yet, he would never ask such a question. Not when he was stricken with an horrific illness, not when we all knew it would lead to this day. He did not ask why, and he did not complain. He seemed to have some innate sense of the ebb and flow of life as he took everything that came his way in stride. He did not worry. He did not stress. He enviably marched to his own drummer, even when that beat seemed to lead him to denial. Even when it mystified Cindy, it was just fine with Jim. The only time he worried was when he was concerned about her, and then he jumped into action to do everything in his power to ease her way, to support her, to assure her that life would go on, which is part of what makes today so devastating as we cry out, does not the universe have a statute of limitations? And yet Cindy herself has acknowledged no one wanted to see him suffer, and Aunt Gail's prayers were answered. His terrible ordeal is over. We are the ones who are now in pain for the loss of him, for the joy of him, for the love of him. Even now we can see him clearly, his big, handsome presence, ready to go, to do, to be involved. He was always ready for the next client, the next game, the next destination, the next adventure. We could share his enthusiasm and tell him that he had ants in his pants, but the delight that was Jim, the joy we felt with him, the anticipation we shared with him, the excitement we experienced with him, was his own joie de vivre, his joy in being alive. That was his gift, and the gift of his presence in our world. He didn't just love this life. He didn't just embrace it with every fiber of his being. He didn't simply exult in every moment with wonder and appreciation. He had a gift for life. He had a talent for life. He was a passionate participator in life. He showed up for life. The very first time that Jim showed up was on September 1st, 1948, as the firstborn child of Joe and Jean Deauville Glazer. He was actually born, on his great-grandfather, James Harry Parks's birthday, and was therefore named for him. He was born in Cleveland, but grew up in Canton, Ohio, where his father worked as a TV repairman. A year after Jim was born, his sister Judy arrived. 15 years after Jim arrived, his brother John came into this world, followed 6 years later by youngest sister Julie. It was as if they were two families, with the second set of siblings so many years after the first. But they all looked up to Jim. He was the big brother, that John considered his timekeeper, as whatever Jim did, John figured he had 15 years to catch up. For Julie, sports brought her close to Jim, especially when she could demonstrate her ability to hold her own on a softball field or the golf course. Judy could also be found on the golf course, but she was the sibling who was closest in age to him and thereby probably saved him from being completely spoiled by parents and grandparents with her arrival just 1 year after his. They had a very close family growing up in Canton, as Jim graduated from Glenwood High School and then went on to the University of Wisconsin on a football scholarship. As mad for sports as he was, and as talented, he was not destined for a professional football, baseball, basketball, or golf career. He had other talents and a broad range of interests, even while sports remained at the top of his list throughout his life. He graduated from the University of Akron with a major in math. By all accounts, Jean and Joe Glazer were a real love match that lasted their entire lives. It was somewhat surprising, as Joe had grown up at Belfair, the Jewish orphan home here in Cleveland. For someone who didn't have much of a family, however, the creation and support of his own was very important to him, and a value he passed on to Jim, with many others that strongly influenced Jim's life. Jim's siblings agree that Jim looked like their father and even sounded like him. As a young boy, Jim would go with his dad on calls as a TV repairman. Jim remembered how he would hold the mirror to see the front of the set as Joe worked on the back, or Jim would be up on the roof manipulating the antennas. We forget how new TV technology was in the 1950s. I can't help but see a direct line from those evenings with his father to Jim's lifelong work in IT as a consultant whose great gift was the ability to demonstrate how technology, and specifically computers, could help a company accomplish its goals better, more efficiently, effectively, and profitably than they were when Jim came to them. He was remarkably successful as he constantly took advantage of new opportunities as they arrived and as the technology continued to improve. He never left a company on bad terms. He loved the creative part of helping a new client find the way to best utilize the available technology to solve problems, to enhance projects and initiatives, and to move the company forward. He was universally liked, respected, valued, and trusted. In all parts of his life, Jim was straightforward, unfailingly honest, a real what you see is what you get kind of guy. He showed up for work, and everyone who had the good fortune to interact with or connect with him knew it. In addition to the work itself, he loved the travel, the people, the trade shows, the swag with which he filled his suitcase to bring home to Jeffrey, Jeff, and Janice, including a hat signed by William Refrigerator Perry of the Chicago Bears, which he drove 2 hours to deliver to Jeff Glazer. By the way, I challenge anyone who is present here this afternoon to remember the names of all the J people who are related to each other. We have a Joe, a Jean. I've lost count of the Jims, a Judy, at least 2 Julias, John, Joanne, Janice, Jacob, Jared, Jenna, and I'm quite certain I have left out at least another dozen names that start with J. Joe's influence on his eldest went far beyond Jeff's interest in and talent with math and technology. Remarkably, Joe had left Belfair with a change of clothes and $25 in his pocket, and yet he made a wonderful life for himself and his family. Jim acknowledged that he grew up poor, but he didn't know it. He never felt as if he missed anything, and he never imagined that he would live the life that he did. He appreciated everything he had and was able to do. Somehow, he developed an ease with life and its vicissitudes, possibly from his father, who knew real hardship but was never discouraged nor deterred. Jim, in like fashion, never internalized the negative. He kept going and inevitably landed in a new opportunity. During challenging times, he didn't worry about money or where his next paycheck might be coming from. He greeted each day as an opportunity with a basic trust that somehow, some way, things would work out. He showed up for life, whatever it had in store for him. One of the things he could always count on, as his father had, were sports. He loved sports. He breathed sports. He showed up for sports, whether he was playing football or baseball in high school and college, or in a men's softball league, or the racquetball court, or especially as a golfer known for his long ball. Sports were his thing, whether watching from the stands or on TV, or playing or coaching or refereeing his kids or other kids as his father had done. It may have been Joe's experience as an orphan that made him a caring, loyal, and devoted mentor, counselor, coach, and referee. Whatever it was, he passed on his dedication to kids to Jim. For 25 years, Jeff refereed high school football. Both Jeff and Jeffrey have wonderful memories of going with him on Friday nights when they could serve as ball boys for the visiting team and would be given all kinds of leftovers from the snack bar at the end of the night. Jeff also refereed basketball and baseball, as his father had done. Joe had also introduced Jeff to Boy Scouts, in which he rose through the ranks to become an Eagle Scout. In fact, his father was troop leader of what became the largest Boy Scout troop in the state of Ohio, Troop 7 at the JCC of Canton. When Joe moved back to Cleveland, Jeff went back to Canton and took over the troop. It was, in fact, his love of and devotion to kids and young people that made his relationship with Cindy possible. She had dated other men and knew that she had to find someone who was not afraid of or resistant to being a parent. In their very first conversation, Jim talked about how much he missed his children as a divorced parent and that he wanted to be a big brother. Jim's siblings spoke movingly of how difficult it was for Jim to go through his divorce and how hard he worked to be present for Jeff and Janice. After a week of traveling for work, he would frequently get off the plane and drive straight to Mansfield to pick them up. Sometimes John or his father would pinch hit for him so that he wouldn't lose the weekend. Jeff thought nothing of driving from Cleveland to Mansfield in the middle of the week to be present for a concert, most likely Janice playing the violin, or a program or a game. Although he loved magic, Jeff couldn't quite figure out how to be in two places at once, but he did everything in his power to be there for Jeff and Janice, to show up for his children and for Cindy's, as Matthew and Jeffrey became true children of his heart. It is still a source of some wonderment that their blended family bonded so quickly and easily. It's not that everything was always perfect. They had their rough patches and difficult moments. But Matt and Jeffrey both responded positively to Jim, and all four children got along exceedingly well from the outset, so that there was never any demarcation between your kids and my kids. There were no fights based on one family's children against the other. From day one, the children meshed, and young as they were, they all seemed to appreciate being part of one family. When friends asked Cindy and Jim how they did it, they responded quite honestly that they hadn't done anything. It just seemed to work. The kids themselves figured it out. And Jeff bonded with Matthew and Jeffrey. When it came to people, big people or little people, Jim was a natural. Open, honest, down to earth. He loved to laugh, and he loved to have fun. He was always ready to take the kids to a game, which, according to his ritual, meant picking up peanuts on the way to the stadium, always parking in the same location, and buying 2 hot dogs, or mustard holders, as the only purpose for hot dogs, in Jim's mind, was to eat stadium mustard. Jim could just as easily pile the kids into the car for an outing to Cedar Point, or the IX Center, or miniature golf, or the batting cages, or bumper cars, movies, tons of Indians games, excursions to see the force, or any sports event would do. There was something about him that suggested a force of nature. He was indefatigable. He was upbeat, energetic, and loved to be in motion, although he had a way of inserting math into anything he was doing with the children. They might count cars of a certain type, add up costs for any number of real or imagined items, compute hypotheticals, or solve an on-the-spot problem. He could not have been prouder, as all 4 of them went to school and found interests that engaged them and gave them goals to pursue. He also delighted in the growth of their family. As Jeffrey married Steffi, Jeff found his Erin, and they found their way back to rural Wisconsin. As Janice continued to grow as a professional, using IT, most recently in the field of human resources, he showed up for his children, and they learned to show up from him. None of us will ever forget the shock and anguish of Matthew's death. When Jim received the impossible news, he turned around, came back to Cleveland, and took charge of every detail necessary to get Cindy to Toronto and then home again. Even as he was grief-stricken, his concern was only for her and what he might be able to do to ease her way, to support her very being, to make the impossible doable. He showed up as Cindy's noble knight of life when darkness and despair threatened to overwhelm her. Neither of them could have foreseen the life that they shared together for a far too brief 37 years when Barbara and Ken Walensky fixed them up in February of 1986 for the day after Valentine's Day, as Cindy already had a date on the 14th. They had similar personal stories. They had both been married for 10 years and divorced for 5. They had both had other relationships and knew what they wanted. They went dancing on their first date and had a wonderful time. They introduced their kids to each other very soon after they started dating. Although his father was Jewish, Jim was raised Episcopalian, but came home every Sunday from church to a brunch of bagels and creamed herring. He knew a bunch of Yiddish words and stood on the pulpit when Matthew and Jeffrey celebrated becoming bar mitzvah. 4 months after their first date, Cindy's mother, Butchie, and father, Beanie, hosted a small, joyous wedding for them, and they showed up for each other. Jeff loved all kinds of music. He was beyond eclectic in his taste, but he was a romantic at heart who had the lyrics to James Ingram's song, "How Do You Keep the Music Playing?" framed as a gift for Cindy. How do you keep the music playing? How do you make it last? How do you keep the song from fading too fast? How do you lose yourself to someone and never lose your way? How do you not run out of new things to say? If we can be the best of lovers, yet be the best of friends, if we can try with every day to make it better as it grows, with any luck, then I suppose the music never ends. Jim could not imagine the music ever ending and looked forward to dancing, laughing, and loving Cindy into eternity. He never saw a romantic comedy movie he didn't like or didn't believe was about him. She would join him in cities all over this country where he traveled for work, and they took wonderful trips to Europe where they loved Paris and wineries and took fabulous small ship cruises all over, including their last cruise that included stops in Spain, Portugal, France, and ended up in the Baltics. Participator that he was, Jim would try to fit in every activity offered on their cruises, while Cindy was quite content to pick and choose. They both felt extremely fortunate to have had the experiences that they did not put them off for some future time, and that even when the children were still at home, they made the arrangements that allowed them to have a life together. When they first started dating, they decided that Friday nights would be for the kids, but Saturday night was for just the two of them, and they went out every Saturday night for 37 years. They mostly went with friends to the movies, theater, concerts, sporting events, dinner. Dancing was always a favorite, as Jim loved to dance. He showed up for the fun, for the adventure, for the blessings of the life they fashioned together. It was one of those sublime mysteries that sometimes grace our lives, that Maddie was born just weeks after Matthew passed away. No one and nothing could ever replace him or remove the pain of losing him, but the arrival of new life brings us hope and the will to go on, brings a balm for the soul and a reason to anticipate the future. Both Maddie and Noah, who arrived 2 years later, adored Jim and brought him great joy. Even as his illness mercilessly progressed, pictures of Maddie and Noah never failed to bring a smile to their dapta. Both Cindy and Jim seemed to know, as Cindy articulated, that you don't regret the things you do, you regret the things that you don't do. Jim Glazer had no regrets. He lived his life fully, robustly, and unreservedly, as only he could have lived it. He never took a nap, perhaps so that he could fill every minute with something he loved to do or someone he loved to be with. He was fortunate on both counts. He was never at a loss for a new adventure or experience. Every person he ever met was his friend, and he had a family that he loved and for whom he loved to show up, at the center of which was Cindy, who made his very own romantic comedy come true. Zichrono livracha. May the memory of this great participator in life, this unique man who always showed up, be for blessing. And let us say, Amen. It is a fearful thing to love what death can touch. A fearful thing to love, hope, dream, to be, and oh, to lose. A thing for fools this, and a holy thing to love. For your life has lived in me, your laugh once lifted me, your word was gift to me. To remember this brings painful joy. 'Tis a human thing, love, a holy thing, to love what death has touched. I call now on the two Jeffreys, Jeffrey Glazer and Jeffrey Wolkoff, and grandson Noah.
Hello, thank you for coming. First, I want to say thank you to Sarah. I was talking to my wife a few days ago about what I should say here, and she said, you should go up there and, come on up here. Don't say anything or not? No? Okay. Yeah, stand on this side. Yeah, Mike. Stand on your side. Thanks. I was talking to my wife a few days ago about what I should say here, and she said, you should go up and talk about how Jim treated you like a son from day one and how he never treated you like he wasn't one of his own. And I said to her sarcastically, yeah, and I'm sure when Whitney Houston died, someone got up and said, that woman could really sing. And the joke is a testament to Jim. I don't need for 1 second to stand up here and try to explain our relationship or how he was there in every way a father is for a son, because it was so clear and obvious to everyone. It was so evident that Jim treated me like his son. I've encountered multiple people who have known me for years and never knew he was my stepfather. In fact, there are probably people here today who, until Sarah said it not long ago, thought he was my father. And for the standards of a father figure dropped into your life at age 5, he was a pretty damn good one. As you've heard already, he was extremely loyal to family and friends. His moral compass was unwavering. He didn't take shortcuts. He never cheated at anything. He despised dishonesty or people who took the easy way out. He was careful and cautious, but he still knew how to have a great time. Sure, he swore quite a lot, and he once got ejected while coaching my Little League team. I wish I could say that part didn't rub off on me, except for the fact that just a few weeks ago I was kicked out of coaching my son's U9 soccer match. I may not have grown on the tree, but my apple did not fall too far. With everything Jim taught us by example or through his words, there was an underlying message of truth and loyalty. We went to many, many Indians games, not just the cushy years at Jacobs Field when the team started winning pennants, but the cavernous old municipal stadium when the team, 20% full, going to the bathroom and peeing into his long ceramic trough next to a drunk stranger, rooting for a team that won about 30% of its games and hadn't been competitive in Jim's lifetime. But Jim wasn't a cynic or a fair weather fan. He loved baseball. He loved the Indians. When we went to a game, he watched every pitch, and he rooted for those 100-loss Corey Snyder-led teams like it was Game 7 of the World Series. He was in, win or lose. We were at Jacobs Field on a Friday night in September 1995 when the Indians clinched a playoff spot for the first time in 41 years, and I watched Jim tear up as they raised the flag for being the division champions, and no one deserved it more than him. He was a truly loyal fan. But one of the things that was great about Jim was that his life wasn't just sports and golf. In many ways, Jim's interests were admirable and interesting. He loved the Cleveland Browns as much as he might have loved the Cleveland Orchestra. Other times, you really questioned his taste. I think he may have loved Barry Manilow as much as Barry Bonds. Jim just loved to be entertained. He did not care how. Any kind of talent, no matter how impressive or downright cheesy. He loved live theater and attended the Playhouse Square Broadway series with my mother for decades. He loved stand-up comedy as long as it was clean. He loved magic, from David Copperfield and Penn and Teller to close-up sleight-of-hand musicians. He loved street performers, jugglers, figure skaters, acrobats. He liked seeing any kind of talent. Live music, he was in. In the summers, he would take Janice and me to Cedar Point. But the thing is, Jim hated roller coasters. He couldn't do the rides. He needed motion sickness wristbands just for airplane trips. So he'd take us, and Janice and I would walk around in the park and go on rides while he sat for hours in the Red Garter Saloon drinking a Diet Coke and watching undergrad music majors from Bowling Green sing Reba McEntire covers. But he loved it. He just loved being entertained. He watched a ton of TV. He watched so many TV series that when he would travel, he would often have 2 VCRs programmed because he'd be taping 2 shows airing at the same time on different networks. He taped so many shows that sometimes, if we were gone for an especially long trip, he would call me midweek and ask me to swap out the tape in the VCR with a fresh one because the previous tape was full. Then, to my mother's delight, he'd come home having left her by herself with 3 kids all week, and he'd have hours and hours of shows to catch up on. But movies were really Jim's thing. Jim saw every movie. And on the weekends, Jim took us to the movies, which is the memory Janice and I talk about the most when it comes to Jim. And oh, did we go to movies. Even when there was nothing good out, we went to movies. Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, Crocodile Dundee, Harry and the Hendersons, 3 Men and a Baby, 3 Men and a Little Lady, Look Who's Talking 2, Look Who's Talking Now. If there was a cheesy, family-friendly PG film released between 1986 and 1993, I can almost guarantee I saw it with Jim, maybe Jan or Jeff or Matt, in the theater on a Saturday afternoon. We saw so many dumb, brainless comedies that we often, after seeing them, would rate them on a scale that came to be called in our family the Who's Harry Crumb scale of stupid movies. Who's Harry Crumb, if you don't know, is a 1989 film in which a millionaire's daughter is kidnapped and the perpetrator just happens to be the head of the detective agency that the father has hired to find his daughter. So the head of the detective agency, since remember he's actually the kidnapper, purposely assigns an incompetent detective played by, you guessed it, John Candy. You may not have seen it. It did not win any Academy Awards, but it nonetheless has not been forgotten. It has lived in infamy in our family for 33 years. Jim loved old movies. He watched Holiday Inn and White Christmas, both with Bing Crosby, every year on Christmas Eve. He loved new movies, comedies, dramas, cheesy rom-coms. It didn't matter. But more than anything, Jim loved the experience. He loved going to the theater and immersing himself into that film for those 2 hours. If you really want to celebrate Jim and honor him, go see a movie. And I'm not talking about Netflix. Get in your car and go to a theater. Doesn't matter what you see, because Jim would have seen them all anyway. Take along a friend or family members, get yourself a big bag of popcorn, or if you really want the true Jim Glazer experience, go to Rite Aid before and sneak some candy and a Diet Coke in your back pocket. But make sure you leave enough time to get there for the trailers and experience a movie the way Jim loved so much. The last thing I want to say is that Jim loved my mother and he loved us kids so much. Last week we were serendipitously all in Cancun together, my mother, Janice, Jeff and Aaron, Maddie, and Noah and Steffi, and we sat at a Mexican fiesta under the opening evening air while 2 identical twin Mexican singers in tuxedos sang a medley that included both New York, New York and Aqua's Barbie Girl. And we looked at each other and we said, Jim would have loved this. He loved being entertained, but even more than that, he loved his family, and he loved all of us being together. And of all the things Jim gave me in my life that I'm so thankful for, it's that he brought together this family. Thank you. Jeff. Thanks, buddy. Come on, honey.
I'm reminded of the Great British Baking Show, and when the contestant is standing there and they have this incredibly complicated thing that they have in their head that they haven't executed yet, and Paul Hollywood stands in front of them and says, "Have you practiced this before?" And they kind of give him a sheepish look and say, "Yeah, I practiced." "Did you do it in time?" "No." "Well, that's me. I practiced, but I have not been able to do this without tears yet. So, welcome along for the ride." I first met my father in mid-August 1975. He was late to the delivery room because he was playing golf. My dad taught me to play golf shortly after that. Golf was a critical skill for communicating with my father. He thought in yards to pin and green slopes. Over the years, many of the things he taught me were learned on the golf course. It would be nice to say that my dad taught me patience from golf, but anyone that has ever met my father knows that is not a life lesson he is qualified to teach. Or that he taught me the golden rule, love thy neighbor as you would love thyself. But that wasn't one of his virtues at golf either. He was way too competitive. I learned to play golf with my dad at Shelby Country Club. There were 18 holes, a driving range, and a pool. Otherwise, it shared nothing in common with whatever image of a country club you have in your head right now. It was what my dad would call a cow pasture, a flat back-and-forth course typical of mid-50s Midwestern golf architecture. I would play many a cow pasture with my dad. I learned not to judge a course by its layout. Playing even the flattest of courses has had little to do with the course. If your head's not in this place concentrating on this shot right now, it didn't matter if it was Shelby Country Club or Inverness. Don't worry about the last shot. Don't worry about the next shot. Just do the best you can with what you have in front of you. I learned how to keep my head down, my elbows straight, my legs bent, my balance centered, and to always follow through with the swing, shifting your weight from center to back to front. I also learned how to carry a bag, tell the wind speed and direction with a blade of grass, read a green, and keep my mouth shut. Great skills for my job as a caddy, which kept me fed for much of college. Later, through my teens and my 20s, golf was one of the few ways I had to spend time with my dad. I was staying at a friend's house in Akron one night. It was one of those epic nights that you talk about with your friends for years afterwards. We were up to all hours of the night, getting into who knows what. And honestly, if you can remember, please let me know. While my friends were sleeping off hangovers, I was learning life lessons from my dad on the golf course. Like, maybe don't drink so much before going golfing with your dad. But during this time, I was able to play with not just my dad, but my grandfather, my dad's father as well. 3 generations of Glazers walking down the 18th fairway. Okay, 1 generation of Glazers walking down the fairway. My grandfather and I were off in the right and left-hand bunkers, respectively. I would get so mad playing golf. I was mad at a lot of things during this time, but most of all, I was angry at the stupid little ball for not going where I wanted it to. It was my grandfather during these games that taught me, as long as the ball is going forward, you are closer to the pin than when you started. I don't think my dad heard that wisdom because he was 100 yards closer to the pin than I was at the time, but my grandfather was a brilliant man too. When he came to Toledo or Chicago or Janesville or Madison, we played golf. Heck, every set of clubs I've ever owned used to be his, so I just kept a second set of his own clubs around. When I came to Cleveland, we also played golf. As I got older, I kept playing golf with my dad. Gone were the bags that I had to carry, sighting distances by stripes on a flagpole and gently tossing blades of grass in the air. Replaced instead with an electric cart with GPS and a satellite connection to the National Weather Service. Your phone has an app that can tell you who teed off first last time and whose turn it is to go now. The driving range turned into a video game. Gone also was the need and ability to hit the ball 300 yards with a 3-iron. Gone were the 3 sand wedges my dad had in his bag. Gone were the obscure betting games. We still teed off at 6:30 a.m. though. After getting there at 6 a.m., after driving for 30 minutes to even get there, and stopping at McDonald's for a breakfast sandwich and Diet Coke. Somewhere along the line, we stopped keeping score too, which was honestly the best thing to ever happen to his putting game. Golf stopped being about the endless pursuit for internal balance and perfection. Came to be a way to enjoy each other's company, to stop and breathe in the early morning fog, and to just enjoy what's in front of you, and to not worry so much about the last shot or the next shot. Thanks. Noah.
Jim, you are the best. I loved you so much, and I will always miss you, and I will never forget you. Doctor, I love you so much, and I miss you, and I hope that you're doing well in heaven. I love you.
Thank you for those beautiful tributes to your father and your Dapta. O God, you give us loved ones and make them the strength of our life, the light of our eyes. They depart and leave us bereft on a lonely way, but you are the living fountain from which our healing flows. To you the stricken look for comfort and the sorrow-laden for consolation. O God, we see life as through windows that open on eternity. We see that love endures and the soul endures, as you, O God, endure forever. We see that the years are more than grass that withers, more than flowers that fade. They weave a timeless pattern in a world that is the dwelling place of your love and glory. Please rise.
מלא רחמים, שוכן במרומים, אמצעי מנוחה נכונה, תחת כנפי השכינה, עם קדושים וטהורים, כזרע רקיע מזהירים, את נשמת החבר שלנו שלח לעולמו, בעל הרחמים יסתירהו בסתר כנפיו לעולמים. ויצרו חיים את נשמתו, אדוני הוא נחלתו, וינוח בשלום על משכבו, ונאמר Amen.
Compassionate God, eternal Spirit of the universe, grant perfect rest in your sheltering presence to James H. Glazer, who has entered eternity. O God of mercy, let him find refuge in your eternal presence, and let his soul be bound up in the bond of everlasting life. God is his inheritance. May he rest in peace. And let us say, Amen.